Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, November 7th, 2022 City Council meeting. Tracy, could we have a roll call, please?
Bermal.
Here.
Harrington.
Here.
Sittig.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Wason.
Here.
Item 3 is approval of the agenda, and we're going to take items 16 and 17 off of the agenda and put them on next council meeting's agenda. Otherwise, there are no other changes. Could I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Item 4 is a consent agenda. Anything on there that you guys want to pull out, talk about? Motion to approve the consent agenda, please.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 5 is public comment. This time is reserved for items anyone in the public can bring to our attention that's not already on our council agenda here tonight. Going once, going twice. I'll close the public comment time. Item 6 is our engineer report, special guest star.
Yes,
Ryan.
thank you. Just a couple items of note. Excited to report that we're getting very close on both our street projects that remain closed. Jones Boulevard, we think will be open within the next 10 days or so, potentially as early as next week, although we need to make a commitment on that just yet based on progress. And then Dubuque Street, we're also very close, could be as early as late this week, more likely probably early next week when that street will open up. They are on target for their November 18th incentive date, which is a week from the end of this week, I believe. So getting close to that, but they should hit that mark with ease. So we're excited about both those projects getting wrapped up. That's what I have for my engineering report tonight.
Terrific. Let's roll it over. Item 7.
Just one other note this evening, and that is we are at the staff level starting to plan for the FY24 budget, which is kind of hard to believe, but that work has begun internally. We'll get a schedule out to you folks, as you all know and have been a part of before. The bulk of your work for this project comes in January, where there'll be some extra, at least one extra meeting and potentially a longer regular meeting. So we'll get that information out to you here this week. And that's what I have tonight, Mayor, unless there are any questions.
Any questions for Ryan? All right, thank you. Item 8 is my report. Just a couple of quick things in the beginning. Ryan and Russ and I don't think anybody else was there with at the annual ICAD meeting a couple of weeks ago. You all got the email from Kate Moreland that she was going to be stepping down there effective January 1st. Heard from her, and then this transition that they'll be going through, if approved, was kind of part of the agenda, but it's also reviewing some folks and some partnerships that they had. And don't get to oftentimes congratulate local teams on qualifying for state, but this was a great week last week. Both Clear Creek, Amana, and Liberty High School made it to the state championship down at the Extreme Arena, which was great to have it so close to home. And having been on that CVB board over the years, watching that come to fruition, and then for that group to pull that off was a great event down there. So congratulations to that organization here locally, and as well to those girls on those achievements. Otherwise, I have a proclamation for Small Business Saturday, and whereas the government of North Liberty, Iowa, celebrates our local small businesses and the contributions they make to our local economy and community, and whereas according to the United States Small Business Administration, there are 32.5 million small businesses in the United States, small businesses represent 99.7% of firms with paid employees. Small businesses are responsible for 62% of new net jobs created since 1995, and small businesses employ 46.8% of the employees in the private sector in the United States. And whereas 79% of consumers understand the importance of supporting the small businesses in their community on Small Business Saturday, 70% report the day makes them want to encourage others to shop small, independently owned retailers, and 66% report that the day makes them want to shop small all year long. And whereas 58% of shoppers reported they shopped online with a small business and 54% reported they dined or ordered takeout from a small restaurant, bar, or cafe on Small Business Saturday in 2021. And whereas North Liberty supports our local businesses that create jobs, boost our local economy, and preserve our communities, and whereas advocacy groups as well as public and private organizations across the country have endorsed the Saturday after Thanksgiving as Small Business Saturday. Now, therefore, we, the City of North Liberty, do hereby proclaim November 26th, 2022 as Small Business Saturday and urge the residents of our community and communities across the county and the country to support small businesses and merchants on Small Business Saturday and throughout the year. Item 9, council reports. Anything that you all participated in or did on behalf of the city to report back to us?
Emergency management meeting was last week, and they're starting to looking at the budget process as well. And they did talk about some reports of using the drones that run under the EMA kind of auspices, and they said that North Liberty gets quite a bit of use out of theirs in the sheriff's department. So, and they've had pretty good success with finding people and things like that. So they were pretty happy about that, and they're looking at finding a place to build a kind of a storage building to consolidate everything, all the equipment that they have, because there's a lot of stuff that's spread out all over the county.
Do you know how many drones the county has?
The sheriff has some. We have some. Coralville, I think, has 2, and Iowa City has 1. I'm not sure if public safety has 1 or not.
Thank you. Anyone else? Miss Ashley.
I attended the United Way Power of the Purse event and the March of Dimes Signature Chef event. Both events were very well attended, raised a considerable amount of money for 2 great causes, and was really excited about the amount of people in our community that are getting back to congregating and celebrating.
Anyone else?
I attended the Affordable Housing Coalition, Johnson County Affordable Housing Coalition monthly meeting a couple weeks ago, and we found out that Sarah Barron, the executive director of that group, is leaving her position there, which is disappointing for me because I think she's a great advocate for affordable housing in Johnson County. But hopefully we'll find someone new. That's good. They also held a screening. It was very small, but you may remember screening earlier this year of documentary film about that featured Candy Evans and what happened here. They asked the filmmaker to do something more Iowa specific because that was more of a national look at different places. And they had a screening of that last week. It was really interesting. A short film and should be available somewhere if you're interested. It's called Iowa Nice. I think that's it.
All right. Thanks, Eric. You had something? No? Okay. All right. Thank you all. Item 10 is our FY22 audit, and Dustin is here to take us through this.
Signing in. Oh boy,
It's been a long day.
it's been a long day. Perfect. Okay, I'm Dustin Opatz. I'm an audit manager with Bergen KDV and here to present the FY22 audit. If any of you have any questions while I'm going through the presentation, feel free to stop me. I have such a passion for city finance that if nobody stops me, I'll just blow through the whole thing.
He's not lying.
And if you have any questions, we can catch them at the end too, if you don't want to stop me either. No worries. So I wanted to start with the audit process. So we start with planning, which happens typically in June or July. I call Tracy. We go over kind of the events of the year. I read through the minutes. And then we go to field work, which happens in like September, October. We come out, we test, examine, grill the finance staff about the year. And then we send out draft reports for city staff to review, and then final reports, and then the council presentation, which is obviously tonight. So that's kind of how the audit goes. So you basically pay us to issue an opinion on the city's financial statements. And so we do issue an unmodified opinion, which is the best we are allowed to give as your auditors. It provides assurance that the financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects. The state auditor also gives us several checklists of state statutes to check compliance with. And so we did have one finding related to that test work, related to debt service disbursements being over the budgeted amounts. And so it's a similar finding that you received last year, and it's not the biggest deal in the world. It's just something that you have to monitor when you're putting your budget together, and if you have extra interest payments or extra debt service payments, to make sure you amend the budget before those amounts are spent. We did have 2 internal control findings. So this first one that I'm going to go over is new to the city. So it's a material weakness related to bank reconciliations. So with the implementation of the New World software, the city has kind of fallen behind on being able to reconcile the software to the bank statements. And so it's one of the recommendation that we have is to kind of get those caught up. The second finding is a mid-level finding, which is a significant deficiency related to lack of segregation of accounting duties. This is the exact same finding the city has received for the last number of years. So no changes there. Kind of going on to the activity for the year. So disbursements exceeded revenues for the year. With net transfers in and bond proceeds issued, cash balances did increase about $600,000 for the year. So looking at receipts for the year, overall receipts increased. So taxes and assessments increased related to an increase in your levy. Intergovernmental receipts decreased related to the CARES grant that you received last year. And then the ARPA money you received this year got deposited in its own fund. So it's not being run through the general fund this year. Licenses and permits and charges for services increased related to some of your park and rec activity kind of bouncing back from the COVID years and having some more activity there. Looking at your disbursements, your overall disbursements increased. So capital outlay decreased quite a bit related to some capital purchases you had last year that you didn't have this year related to some equipment. Your general government expenditures increased related to the addition of an IT director, as well as some step and lane increases. Public safety disbursements increased related to adding an additional officer, as well as an additional fire employee, and then step and lane increases. Parks and rec increased related to that increase in programming. So you had those costs related to that increase in revenue. And then health and social services increased related to allocating some additional funding this year to some of those social services that you pay for and some of those nonprofit organizations. Moving on to your enterprise funds. So looking at operating income, starting with water, you did have about a $200,000 increase in operating income. That's related to an increase in the number of users as well as you raising your water rates. So outside of that amount, you did have pretty significant capital project disbursements and debt service disbursements. And then sewer, looking at sewer, you actually had a decrease in operating income of about $100,000 related to increased operational costs. And then those sewer rates stayed exactly the same. You didn't change those. And then outside of the regular disbursements, you also had pretty significant capital and debt service activity as well. And then stormwater stayed pretty flat as far as operating income, only decreasing about $3,000. Looking at overall cash balances, so the green bar is your water fund. And so that number has, been pretty steady over the last few years, increasing slightly due to just positive operations. Your sewer fund has decreased, which is the blue bar, has decreased over the last couple years, just related to some larger capital projects that you had, as well as operationally things have become more expensive. Looking at stormwater, which is the little black bar down at the bottom, that has stayed pretty consistent. You did have an increase this year related to some bond proceeds that were deposited in the storm fund for future projects. That's what I got. Do you have any questions for me?
You guys have any other questions? Go ahead, Brent.
So this may be more for Tracy. So Tracy, explain the bank reconciliation issue with new software. What's the hiccup there?
So we're still doing things in Encode on a daily basis. All of that data has to be entered into New World. I'm making all of those entries. So I'm doing all of that plus my daily work plus all of the other new things that I'm learning in the system. Bank reconciliation has fallen by the wayside. We will be up and running in the utility system hopefully by the end of this calendar year. And I am ahead. I'm finishing August as we speak. So it's good. Just it's quantity of work. There aren't enough hours in the day.
Sure. So the new software didn't add. Did it add additional staff hours for you in?
The implementation has added significant number of
Sure,
hours.
which we
Once we
knew.
get through the implementation, it will be less than it used to be.
Okay.
It'll be improved. But it's just the whole implementation because it's
Yeah.
dual entry into both things. So where we have 4 people entering into Encode, I'm entering it all into New World.
Nice.
So
I think that's kind of the big thing that I found interesting is until we get everything switched over, we're still having to operate both systems, and so that's just been a real pain for the folks who are having to do that.
And that transition took longer than
Oh,
it should have because of COVID. The training, there was a lot of training involved that couldn't happen in person, that had to happen remotely, and it just is harder and clunkier.
I just didn't know if there was, a module or something we were missing in the new software that would help eliminate some staff time. But
no, we do have a module that's out there that's amazing, and it will be wonderful. I just have to get to the ability to be able to rock and roll in it.
sure.
I've done parts of it. I'm excited because it'll be really slick.
Cool.
Any other questions? Okay. Thanks, sir.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Did we get a note from?
They said they would be, so, but I'm not seeing them.
No. All right. We're going to move past item 11 for the moment.
We need to.
Don, can I get a resolution on the
Go back to that.
audit, please?
Yeah, I don't want to cross it off the list. Surprise.
I can't do anything with it until I have that.
Hey, let's look at resolution number 2022-19, and this is a resolution accepting the audit report for the fiscal year 2022 as completed by Bergen KDV. Could I have a motion for this, please?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Do you guys have any other questions for Austin before he escapes?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Oh, hold on. Tracy, roll call, please.
Sittig,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Harrington,
Aye.
Bermal,
Aye.
Wason.
Aye.
It's official. Now you can go off.
Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Dustin. See you.
We're gonna come back to item 11, if necessary, tonight. Move ourselves up to item number 12, which is our Watts zoning amendment. And this is our second consideration of ordinance number 2022-23, an ordinance amending the zoning map district designation for certain property located in North Liberty, Iowa, from ID interim development district to RS4 single unit residence district. Could I have a motion to open this consideration?
So move.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Do you guys have any questions or comments? Okay, Tracy, roll call, please.
Harrington,
Aye.
Sittig,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Bermal,
Aye.
Wason.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Item 13 is Donovan Housing Holdings zoning amendment. This is our second consideration of ordinance number 2022-24, an ordinance amending the zoning map district designation for certain property located in North Liberty, Iowa, from ORP Office and Research Park District to RM12 Multi-Unit Residence District and C3 Higher Intensity Commercial District. Could I have a motion to open this consideration?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Do you guys have any questions about this?
Russ, did we have any input from, did we hear from Geico on this one?
I recall them being in the neighborhood meeting, but we're just there to just hear what was going on.
Okay.
Any other questions? Tracy, roll call, please.
Bermal,
Aye.
Harrington,
Aye.
Sittig,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Wason.
No.
Motion carries for affirmative, against. Item 14 then is GRD Burleson LLC zoning amendment, and item A is the public hearing regarding proposed zoning amendment. Anyone in the audience wishing to address council tonight? Now is your chance.
Hello. Good evening. My name is Kate Connell. I was here a couple weeks ago about this amendment. We did submit a letter that was a counter to the suggested condition that city staff sent to us with consideration, it sounds like, with an agreement from the developer. And we did send that yesterday. I do want to just note that that comes from my husband and I at 2786, and then also our residential neighbor that's next to us, which last time when I spoke, I was really just speaking on my behalf, but tonight I'm speaking on behalf of this letter. And I don't want to go over all the stuff again. I just want to add a couple of supplementary things just to take into consideration with what we felt like was fair and reasonable based on our existing residents and then also the developer's needs and wants and how that relates to the city of too, of course. So the big thing that we're asking for is a 35-foot setback with an additional 1 foot of added setback for every 1 foot that the building is over 35 feet. So the big thing I talked about last time was how C3 really allowed for higher height for buildings. So we feel like from our perspective, this is still a concession as people who live here, but we feel like it still protects some of the things that we have as homeowners of that land. I didn't mention this last time, but I just also want to acknowledge that there's great privilege that comes with being a homeowner. And so I want to acknowledge that. Obviously, being here speaking for our livability is important, but we also are grateful that that's the case and that we understand when these meetings are and we can come and speak to you all. So thank you for that. The way we came to this number was because if this was a residential development behind our home, the setback would be 30 feet. If it was a rear setback, which it is for our house, it's not a side setback, which I think is important to note in case that becomes a counter. This isn't the side of our house where we don't have windows, when we have built-in privacy. It's the rear part of our home. So the 30 rear yard setback, if it was residential, feels like it should be considered here as a starting point because we are a residence. And the other folks, when we look at zoning and space, it's usually similarly done. It's not a residence into a C3. 35 feet is less than a yellow school bus. So I live near Liberty High and I see all these school buses parked there. I just want to give us a real idea of what we're talking about with space. So 35 feet is still, we're not talking a lot here in the totality, but it does make a big difference, although we're still going to have to deal with things like shade in the yard because of the size of the building. The difference of use is going to be something that is going to be a modification for us, and we understand that. It's not awesome, but it is the reality of what we will have there as the city looks to have that be higher intensity, and we understand that, but I think it's important just to keep in mind how much that is. The other thing, and this is rough math, and maybe this is husband math. This is not me. This is him doing some math here, but excuse me. The additional 15-foot allowance that we're asking for on that west side is equates that additional amount that we're asking for the setback without the added 1 foot for each foot of height equates to an added 2.7% of the total parcel that they're asking for rezoning. So when we're looking at how big that parcel is, this is still a reasonable ask. This isn't something that is going to change their ability to use that land as they wish to do. It's not going to change the ability for that to become high intensity for everybody who lives in North Liberty to be able to enjoy. But it still is a reasonable amount that hopefully can help maintain that livability that we have. I mentioned in that note that, we are the residents first, and we agree that all these things should come, development, commerce, all this stuff. But we hope that it can be done in a way that still maintains that livability for us and hopefully makes this be something where we don't have to constantly be like wondering what's happening to this space. We can know that city staff and city council has agreed that if this was their backyard and if they had chosen to buy this house in North Liberty because they love this community, that the people that are designed to be the checks and balance keepers would uphold hopefully as much livability as possible. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
All right, item B is our second consideration of ordinance number 2022-25, an ordinance amending the zoning map district designation for certain property located in North Liberty, Iowa from ID, Interim Development District, to C3, Higher Intensity Commercial District. And could I have a motion to open this consideration?
So moved.
Been moved and seconded. Do we need to incorporate the changes? We do, correct? That have been suggested since the last meeting?
Well, may I? Mayor?
Yeah, please do. That's
So,
what I'm
yeah,
asking.
I mean, that's, yes, you do, if that's what you want to do. It's within your discretion to do so. Now that you have a motion open to discuss it, you can have a motion to amend the item before you. I would note that conditions on rezoning are effective only if the owner has signed off on them. So the only condition that the owner has signed off on is the one that's in italics in the second paragraph of the item in your memo here. So that condition has been agreed to, is my understanding, by the property owner in writing prior to the opening of this public hearing tonight. So if you want to amend the ordinance to incorporate that, you can use language saying as much.
So just to be clear, the change, what the developer has agreed to is a 20-foot setback with an additional foot of setback for each foot they go above 35 feet.
That's correct. Yes, and staff's opinion, I think the initial objection that came through was a concern about the intensity of the C3 district and the allowance for the additional building height. So staff felt that moving buildings away further from the residential property as they get higher would be a fair compromise in this case.
And we still think that the southwest portion of that property is going to be all drainage. Is that right?
Yes, and Ben's here. Ben and I've spoken a couple of times since that. I mean, he's very sympathetic, as staff is, to Ms. Connell's concern and Mr. Potts. I think toward the southeast of their property, it'll be large. I think it could narrow up a little bit as it goes north because the drainage area gets smaller. But I still think the lay of the land, so to speak, is going to create that natural buffer.
And we still have a buffer requirement as well.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's articulated in the code.
What's the setback for the C2 district?
C2 district requires a 10-foot side yard setback. Understanding that the intensity might be a little higher in C3, and I did a little comparison comparing the C3 district to the C2 district. There's 5 uses that you can do in C3 that you can't do in C2. There's 8 uses that you can't do in C2. There's 8 uses you can do in C2 that you can't do in C3. And so I think something better said, although it wouldn't sound better in the code, was larger in scale perhaps than intensity, as far as uses go. And so that was one of the things staff took into consideration. A 35-foot high building could be 10 feet from that side property line. In this case, it moves further. It's 20 feet as a minimum. And if it gets higher, then it moves further away. And I think the way it's written, I think that makes sense to incorporate that into the zoning ordinance if this is a concern. And I think it's a good condition. I've seen it before, and it's just easy enough to add to the C3 district moving forward.
Not just for this one, but for all of them.
Right.
Entirely.
Correct.
Okay.
So kind of the C3, it's probably better to have fewer, bigger structures than in that similar size C2 area where you're going to have a bunch of little.
That's right. That's right. And again, I think I mentioned last time, I kind of look at moving from the C1 to the C2 to C3 is kind of moving up in scale. And we kind of want more contemporary planning is having a mixture of uses, whether they be within the same building or on the same lot. And that obviously encourages walkability.
Do you know how high the buildings on Kansas Avenue are?
The apartments,
Yeah.
those are, Chris and I looked at those today. They're 3 stories. So they're probably in the realm of 40 feet, 42 feet. The other thing the mayor and I were talking about earlier is there's a construction technique that tends to limit the size of building height in North Liberty. Now, I'm not saying it can't go bigger because it could, but when you go you saw the Penn Street apartments that went up, they're 4 stories intentionally because they can use timber for 4 stories. When you start going above 4 stories, that bottom floor has to be concrete. I think they're doing building over at the landing right now in Coralville, and you can see that first floor was concrete, then they went stick above that. That tends to what we see here, although it could go larger. It's just there's economics involved to it.
And as a reference, that's the new building being constructed by Tin Roost, that adjacent parking lot.
Grant, do we need to start over with a zoning ordinance if we do this amendment, or we can just go ahead with second reading?
No, you don't need to start over.
Amendment to it first, and then we go back
Right.
to the
Yeah.
original one. Correct?
Right, so we have the initial motion now is establishing the ordinance. You can have another motion on top of this one to amend it, right? And then this one will either pass or fail. You can even, if you really wanted to, you could amend the amendment, but let's stick it with just one. It would be my recommendation. So I would recommend, if you're wanting to entertain the staff's condition, would be a motion to amend the ordinance to incorporate the condition language set forth in the
In the memo, page 5.
in this, page 5 of the city administrator's memo. You can read it all verbatim if you want, but doing it by reference like that is sufficient here. And then you would need a second. We'd do a roll call on that, and then you could have another roll call on the amended thing or not amended, depending on how it proceeds. Is that responsive to your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we could go ahead with the second reading and not have to go back to a first reading.
This is the one case where we can do that, where we can have for handling an amendment, you can do that, handle that amendment before you go back to the pending original one.
Sure.
Any other questions, you guys?
Mayor, I'd make a motion that we amend the ordinance that is on the floor, I guess, with the language included on page 5 of the city administrator's memo.
Does that work, Grant?
Sure does.
Okay.
You just-
Second, a second.
That's the amendment's been moved and seconded. Do you guys have any questions or discussion about the amendment? Okay. Tracy, a roll call, please.
Sittig,
Aye.
Wason,
Aye.
Harrington,
Aye.
Bermal,
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
The amendment carries. Okay, now we're back to the ordinance and the second consideration. Any further questions or comments with that now, with this amendment in place?
I just want to thank staff and the developer for working on this and you for your input. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I would be more concerned if they didn't have backyards, but they have pretty good backyards, so.
Tracy, roll call, please.
Smith,
Aye.
Sittig,
Aye.
Harrington,
Aye.
Bermal,
Nay.
Wason.
Aye.
Motion carries 4-1. Thank you all. Hey, thank you as well. We're going to move on to item 15 briefly, and then V will catch you after this, okay? That's all right. Item 15 is our FY22 Annual Urban Renewal Report. And this is just a discussion and possible action on the FY22 Annual Urban Renewal Report. Tracy, you got this one?
I'm sorry.
Oh,
No problem.
No, I can take it.
Because
Tracy
we're
can
both
step
over
in.
there like,
Yeah.
all right, you got it?
Yeah, this is a report that's required by the state. It's actually a fairly new report within the last handful of years that we've had to do this. And we've included, what's included here is just traditionally how we've used tax increment financing dollars, whether it's through bonds that we've borrowed or rebates for projects. And it's just explaining what we have done with those funds previously. So what you're looking at is FY22 data, and of course, previous years after. And we would ask that you approve the report so we can submit it to the state.
How's that sound? Any questions for Ryan or staff?
And so what we're looking at here is past data, and what we were going to be looking at in 16 and 17 is future data.
Yeah.
Got it.
Sorry, it
The
gets
distinction.
That's fine.
confusing. Yeah.
So, yeah, 22 and 24 and nothing about 23.
All right. Anything else? It looks like we're good. We need a roll call on this then.
we need a motion and a second first, please.
You got it. Could I have a motion to approve this FY22 annual urban renewal report?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions, discussion? Okay, now a roll call, please, Tracy.
Bermal,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Sittig,
Aye.
Wason,
Aye.
Harrington.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you all. V, we will come back to the top. All right, we're glad that you're here and that you're okay. Does.
Thank you for your patience.
No problem. We have technical support behind you if you need it to pull it up.
Yeah, I can also talk through what was ever in your packet.
Do you need a hand real quick with anything?
If you exit out of the one that's on that laptop, you'll find that yours should be right there.
Great. It's fantastic. Exit out like as an escape. Yes. Great.
Thank you, Derek.
Again, thank you so much for having me tonight. VFix Rise with SD Planning. And tonight we'll be talking about the Inclusive Economic Development Plan. We had talked with you several months ago when we were first kind of getting started. And thank you all for your input and help as we kind of moved through the planning process, which has been a year, which kind of blows my mind sometimes. But just to give you a sense of where we're headed, I'm just going to go through things pretty quickly. I know folks are probably eager to talk about the recommendations and some of the findings. Obviously, we could not do any of this without our partners. It's been widespread support, from our institutional business support and our business support institutions, and then of course our partners, such as Center for Worker Justice, Banjo and Its Empowerment, and down on the line. So it's been an incredible journey. So really, we were trying to do a couple of things with this inclusive economic development plan. Obviously, we were focusing on underestimated business owners, which was, BIPOC, women-owned, people with disabilities, those types of businesses, but then also looking at across the board sort of a study and saying like, well, what do we already have in Johnson County? We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We know that different towns are doing different things, and the county itself had done its own economic development plan very recently. So we wanted to incorporate all of that through this lens very specifically. Just to give you a sense of the timeline, like I said, it's been about a year. We did our research, our surveys, our focus group. A lot of that was really in the summer. And then we culminated in a strategic doing session where we actually had folks from, North Liberty attend and Swisher and all across the board, as well as those business support institutions and businesses themselves. So we came up with some pathfinders there. And then you'll see like our plan development took a few months, and that's not just because we were sitting back, massaging our keyboards, although we did do a lot of that. It was really also going back out and ground truthing what we heard. The responses that we got, the survey answers, we wanted to get back to the community and say, hey, this is what we want to say. What do you think? Are we representing this accurately? So that takes time. So some of the results I wanted to go over, we did hear back from 105 total respondents. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about underestimated business owners, you're talking about people that own, 3 different businesses or supporting families in other countries. So that can be really hard. We found very quickly, obviously, they don't have a lot of time to just sit around and, fill out a survey online. So we did door knocking, we did mailers, and then we ended up knocking doors with interpreters because we realized that, this is who we're trying to hear from. But we also heard from our support institutions as well, which was fantastic. One thing that is really, I think, indicative of how we're trying to be inclusive is not only the results that we get and the methodologies that we use, but also the questions that we ask. And so in order to have an inclusive plan, we wanted to ask open-ended questions, which drive quantitative survey and analysis folks crazy. But we also wanted to make sure that people felt like they could authentically represent themselves. So when we ask people, what race are you from or what ethnicity are you from, you get a really wide range of responses. And it, I think, also further complicates our understanding of what race and ethnicity is. So you have people saying, I'm culturally Jewish or I'm Northern European, Anglo-Saxon, Saxon, Northern, yeah, so Caribbean. These identifiers would not have been available if we had just said check a box, right? So we really wanted to say, how is our community reflected here? So I just encourage you to look through that data. It's very interesting and cool to see our community reflected. Some of the outreach highlights here, you have our focus groups that we worked with across the county. People that we're working with, obviously Center for Worker Justice, so Sudanese communities, Spanish-speaking communities across and also people who were formerly incarcerated as well. One of the things that we also wanted to show was to dispel some of the mythologies about underestimated businesses themselves. So oftentimes people think, oh, well, they're not very educated, or they come and they have, education from another country. But we actually wanted to show that, overwhelmingly, over half of the people we talked to had not only undergraduate degrees, but then you had masters and PhDs. So really wanting to just dispel some of those myths around the underestimated businesses. Of course, there's going to be data that really is shocking. And I have to say, this one really made us sit down. The fact that people are talking about rent costs over 20% really was hard to hear. We know that it is very expensive to have commercial rentals in many of the towns in Johnson County. But I'm not sure how a business is profitable if they're spending 70% on their space. So we didn't have the time and energy to sit down and go through, this wasn't our focus, but it's something that I think is a huge red flag. We know commercial rental spaces are expensive. We need to understand how is that really impacting these entrepreneurs and existing businesses. So it's kind of an opportunity I see. Not only did we want to show the data, though, we wanted to provide voices. And so here we have people telling us, what actually inspired you. It's very culturally acceptable in other places to have your kids with you at work. And so a lot of folks just said, well, I want to have my children with me. That's just how I was raised. And, that, but not only that, it's so that they can have an understanding about how to open a bank account, or go into the city and ask for a permit. They wanted to pass on that generational information and of course that generational wealth. So you can see that some of the voices coming through here. Additionally, just a continuation of those voices, when we talk about financial resources and how people are accessing those, I think it's also important to understand from people's own words why they don't feel like they can access those resources. So people say that they're afraid to go into the banks. Or I heard a lot of folks saying culturally that it is just unacceptable to go into debt. Like they would rather do anything but go into debt. So you see, selling your truck or, waiting years working for somebody else, saving that money on the side to put that in, into their business. So a lot of people talked about being intimidated. I mean, just across the board, people said, whether that was going into a bank or going to get a permit or what have you. A lot of people talked about bringing their white friends with them, quite frankly, because they thought they were treated better. So I'm glad that people felt comfortable, saying the things that were on their mind and their own experiences. Some of the resources, obviously, that act as barriers, they're not very surprising. That affordability we talked about, access to resources, and then, of course, tied into the commercial space is finding that desirable location. But some of the things I think that are a little bit more nuanced, you'll see some indication of childcare services or insurance, access to those professional services, whether that's legal or accounting services, things like that. Those relationships are just not existing. So they're not accessing that kind of assistance. So that's something that's indicative of that. And then on the other side is support institutions. We asked those, our banks, our people who are giving out loans from like cities or grants and things like that. And we asked, are there those programs around? And there were some, but what we noticed was that it's really only been in the past 2 years. So it's really been in a response to COVID. And also, even though banks are required to gather some information, there's not a lot of information. And that is kind of understandable. I mean, you don't want to profile people, but at the same time, we also don't have information then to kind of support some of the changes we want to make. One thing we thought was interesting was this information flow. So a lot of folks talked about word of mouth is the number one way in which they get information. Well, we all know word of mouth can be very wrong or can shift, just depending on maybe somebody had a bad day or maybe that person isn't there anymore or what have you. So a lot of people talked about wanting to have that centralized information, but where people get information differs greatly than where information is put out. So a lot of support institutions were putting information on their websites. You can see just a lot of people weren't going there. Maybe they didn't know that that was available to them. Maybe they didn't know that that support institution. But you can see it's how do we get at that word of mouth aspect of it? There's some overlap, but not a lot. Spending time on newsletters and those kinds of things. Are you wasting time, essentially? How could we be doing better? And a lot of times we talked about complicating that a little bit further by printing things out and actually putting it in the laundromat or putting it in the barber shop or putting it where people will see it so that they know that there's a loan or a grant happening. Otherwise, they won't see it. Then this was also a further thing that was kind of interesting. There's not a lot of information in multiple languages, and that was definitely a barrier that people had indicated, that if they couldn't see something in their own language, of course, they would have a hard time applying for it. And we do offer some. It's only in Spanish in Johnson County, but you can see demographically that that's not only hitting a percentage of folks, so Mandarin and French being the others. Of course, we wanted to understand where there are COVID impacts. And yes, there were some. And so how were support institutions responding to that? Well, we think about the fact that millions of dollars came through our state, just looking at PPP loans. I'm a small business owner, so I received one. But we think about the millions of dollars that came through, and really only about $50,000 was made available to underestimated businesses. And those were in small loans of like $1,500, $800, which is it's not a small thing. It's just not as much, right? But then if you didn't have those established, relationships with an accountant or somebody at the bank, if you don't have a relationship with somebody at the bank, then you didn't know you could apply for PPP. A lot of people just said, I didn't know if I qualified. So there's some more we can do there. But it's not all doom and gloom. We did come up with a lot of solutions and opportunities that overlapped from underestimated businesses and those support institutions. That there's one-on-one mentorship opportunities, actually having more street vending opportunities, which ties into actually some of our Pathfinder projects. And then there's, of course, affordable spaces and obviously more resources. One thing I did want to point out was we asked this question of a lot of folks, to create equity and opportunity for all, or not question, it's a statement. I believe a greater portion of resources should go to those who are most in need. And you can see that it skews to strongly agree. And I just want to point out that that's fantastic. That's people that are, underestimated business owners and those support institutions are really in agreement that we need to take care of people that have barriers to access. And you can see some of those barriers. Some of these we've already talked about, the cost of rent, missing those relationships, feeling that hostile business support. And then there were a few others that were listed, like lack of access to childcare and the like. We did culminate in a strategic doing session, and so I want to thank folks for participating in that. We came out with 3 Pathfinder projects, the mobile food vendor portal, which North Liberty is participating in, and so really want to thank you all. The fact that we actually highlight your ordinance as the golden ordinance because it's so easy to read. So thank you. So that, we're going to be making some headway there, which is exciting. A Johnson County Business Education Series specifically focusing on underestimated businesses has already started, and then an underestimated membership program. So those are 3 Pathfinder projects that are already underway. To the recommendations, we have basically what we are saying, behind the scenes support and then public facing support. And at the number one kind of overall, if we could have everything, it would be that neighborhood level multicultural business hub. And really why that is, and I'll just skip ahead for a second, is because we know that if it was within a neighborhood, maybe it's within walking distance or biking distance or, there's access to transportation. So you're lowering those barriers to actually get to this multicultural chamber. And maybe it's a Spanish speaking business chamber. I mean, we just said multicultural because we're really fortunate to have so many cultures in Johnson County. So it could be a number of them. But then you would have those trusted business experts. You would have that centralized information that everybody was asking about. Maybe you could host the membership programs, access to that direct funding from federal, state, and local grants because they would be a business chamber. And then if it allows the space and the finances, that low or no cost commercial kitchen is something that a lot of people talked about. So it does align with some of that Project Better Together 2030, those goals as well. And that's kind of the number one thing that we're really looking at. Back to the top though, just so you can see the behind the scenes and the public facing, there's a lot that can be done behind the scenes. And of course, we have a lot of them listed here. I'd be happy to talk about them more in depth. The couple ones that I'm going to just hit on real quick are currently supporting those current BIPOC-led business support institutions. And we thought it might be helpful, if there was a commitment from the cities or the county to say, hey, we are going to, dedicate this amount of money to BIPOC-led business support institutions. Maybe it would be helpful to have a criteria. So do those organizations already have like a number, they're in good standing basically, but then also they're already providing those programs, the funding and lending programs, and maybe they do economic development programs too, like entrepreneur financial literacy, those kinds of things. When we looked across the board at who we were already working with, that criteria, just those two things, we have a list started. It does not include everybody, but you can see MDCI was on there, Center for Worker Justice, Emprendimiento Latino 5, Diversity Markets, Rights, House of Fat. Like there's already some of this that we know is in our community, but that's obviously not all of them. So, and then behind the scenes, we know that there is a perception that people feel like they can't go into city and county buildings. And so how do we start to change that culture? And I think it's, there's a lot that can be done. Of course, there's always, the internal trainings that can happen for city and staff, but then also thinking about the spaces when people walk into. I mean, a lot of people talked about, when you walk into a space and there's like welcome in many different languages, or there's like flags of every different country or something like that, it sort of puts people at ease. It says, we recognize you, we see that you're in our community, and we welcome that. So what we're going to be doing is just continuing to support our Pathfinder projects, and then working with the cities and the county to offer those specific action steps. We recognize that every city and town, and of course the county, is very different. And so we want to, start with any of, the stated goals that you have, and then help convene those underestimated business owners, help kind of put this together, because we understand that while this is a very big plan, it is a lot of information. And so how do we kind of make it work for North Liberty? So that is my 21-minute spiel on that plan. I'd be happy to answer any questions or comments.
Yeah, I'll just say that I think you're being, although this report was extensive, you're being rather modest in all of the time and effort that you all put into this. This was a lot of work, and this is just a touchstone on what you're going to be able to do for our community. I was lucky enough to be one of the panelists there, so I know what time they've already put into this and are continuing to do. What kind of questions do you have for V, since we have them here now?
One of the things that popped up, it was the kitchen. We have a co-lab in a couple places. We need a co-kitchen. I don't know how you would do that, but it was a very interesting idea.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I'm certain that it would get a lot of use. It's something we heard time and time and time again. Yeah.
You talk about neighborhood centers. I mean, how big is a neighborhood?
Yeah, and that's something that we wanted, the cities and towns to define themselves, because everybody's a bit at different scales. And I think that, one model that we look to is like the neighborhood centers for Johnson County. They're already in a neighborhood and they provide services. But I think it could look different for any city, So I think that the things that you would have to consider really are, maybe it's adding on to something that's already happening, maybe you just add a person, like a staff member or an office, or if it's a new building that is going to be proposed, or reusing an old building, taking into consideration transportation access, and then also like any adjacent cultural neighborhoods that it's associated with. So When I think of neighborhood centers in Johnson County and the Pheasant Ridge, there's a lot of Sudanese there. So it would make sense if Iowa City wanted to kind of do something like this, that they would maybe just add an office or something instead of trying to do the full blown, commercial kitchen, all that kind of stuff. But it's meant to be very flexible. And so, yeah, there's just, I think, considerations when you're thinking of scale and access.
Question. Of those emerging or existing businesses, I'm assuming some of them are in North Liberty. Is there a way, or I guess I should rephrase this, are those individuals open to participating directly with the city to just have some collaborative ideas and, just brainstorming,
Right.
of their needs? Or are they hoping to go through a channel where they have an intermediary between both parties?
That's a great question. So in order to generate trust, we did not ask specifically for people's identifiers. We asked for crossroads. What's your nearest crossroad, kind of. But I think, just to kind of just talk a little bit further about that, I think that if you were to put out there that the city is wanting to convene and talk with folks about this. I know that there's already people in your community. I mean, I'm thinking Chad Simmons off the top of my head was a part of this. And once you kind of tap into those leaders, there's a ripple effect. And that's what we did with the plan. We talked to Chad, we talked to, Rakisha, we talked to some folks and just said, hey, who can we talk to? So I think you would have actually a response from the community if you were to say, and you can or you don't have to reference this plan, but that these are the things that you're looking for. But when you do that, don't just put it on your website, like put it in the barbershops and the laundromats and, have it in a couple different languages. And then, of course, that's incumbent upon the city to make sure that you have translators and interpreters and, that it's not just like a first step into the door, but that there's a pathway through to actually providing that. I'll say if there were multiple, if that information, if that, flyer or whatever is in multiple languages, you're already on the right track, because I think people would see that in their lavanderia, in their Spanish bakery and, or something and be like, wow, they really, they get it. They get that we're not going to be able to always come to city council meetings or, what have you. And then I think there would be considerations for when you do convene folks or, gather folks, just, are you, what's the time of day? Are you having childcare, transportation, food, access, things like that? Because like I said, they're very full lives and sometimes they have those barriers of childcare and transportation. So it was an incredible experience, I'll just say personally, to host these focus groups where several of them, there was just an English interpreter. So me and my team were the ones that didn't actually, we didn't know. It was a very humbling experience and I highly recommend it because everybody felt really comfortable sharing, because they were amongst their own culture and their language. And so you could tell it was just an ease, even though they were talking about really difficult things. So I think it's a way of generating that trust. Yeah. But I think you would get a response. Yeah. Great question.
Yeah, no kidding.
Just to piggyback off of what he said, this was very extensive and a lot of work. I did have a chance to go to one of the more public and visual things of the diversity market and to see the second year of it being in existence and just the difference and just the feedback and the excitement of it, and to be able to go and talk to a lot of vendors who were small, and it was great to see. My question is, well, I kind of know that that's going to be a continuation, but is there kind of conversation about expanding the diversity market in other areas? I know going to South District is a journey for some people, as they say, but even if it was like here, once or something like that, would that be a consideration just to give exposure to those businesses? Because I know southeast side of Iowa City is heavily like that's where a number of the most cultural businesses are, and folks don't always get to experience that. Not saying that they can't drive over there, because I think there's a lot to experience on the southeast side of Iowa City, but also to bring some of those businesses here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, North Liberty, you all do such a great job of hosting events that attract people all over. And so I think it's in Iowa, like if you build it, they will come. You know, South District happened. It was very organic with the neighborhood and Angie Jordan. And there's only one Angie Jordan. But I think that, you know, North Liberty has its own flavor and its own, you know, like people expect certain places of activity. And so 100%, I think that it could absolutely extend. And I think that you're looking at the future of economic development. I mean, that's what I really hope that you walk away with is as you look at the demographics of our county, we are so fortunate that we have so many people coming from different countries and cultures wanting to share that with us, and also, you know, making space for that, I think it's only going to get better. You know, it's only going to improve our communities. And in terms of the South District, I actually don't think a lot of those businesses live there.
And that's the other thing. In just going and listening to some of them talk, it's expensive to run a business and have the overhead cost of a physical location, and that was a lot of what the conversation was. But I think just the fact that they had more clientele just because they participated in that, and that was what, 10 weeks this time?
All summer,
and they
yeah.
were there every weekend. But like I said, it was a lot of great vendors and diverse vendors, because sometimes you can go to markets like that and it's like one table after the next is the same thing, and that wasn't the case there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, you're seeing more of these across the state. You know, Ames just had it's food truck, but it's like they have a space. Everybody knows it's, you know, Friday night, and that's where people go. I mean, there's so many different models across the state that could be utilized. And, you know, oftentimes you go and there's, you know, just like an open lot, or, you know, you can transform that space even just by having those vendors there. And when talking to vendors, they just want those low barrier opportunities. You're right. I mean, a lot of them aren't, you know, storefront operations because they literally can't afford it. So, you know, putting all of those, like, you know, putting barriers in front of them is a deterrent, but it's literally like, yeah, hey, we want to try this out. And I think that, you know, we're probably at an age too where people are a little bit more accepting of risk taking when it comes to economic development and like cultural diversity. Like people say that, like, can kind of understand that, well, we haven't had a lot of this, we haven't had a lot of opportunities, but that there are opportunities. And that's why we don't have a cookie cutter approach outlined here, because we know that every community is different. And you have different demographics, but you're also going to attract, I think, across the county, potentially even to other counties. We had some of the folks for the diversity market come from Cedar Rapids, come from Washington, you know, come from Louisa County. So, you know, people understand that there is a draw. And I think the South District is just an example. It's just, you know, you could absolutely do that here.
I think I got some of the best syrup and wax candle from the market. Just FYI, anybody that wants some.
Yeah, some really great food.
That too.
That too. Yeah, but great question. I hope that that's what we see.
Yeah, I agree, and I hope we as a council will be able to incorporate some of this into economic development plans moving forward, because I think these folks have seen this before, and they've heard organizations come and ask the same questions over and over, and they're looking for action items, and so the action items have to be there. And it would be a shame to have all of this work completed and having all of the listening done and compiling all of the needs that they have, and nothing comes from it.
Yeah.
That would be a shame.
It would be heartbreaking, and I think that we would lose an opportunity.
Right.
I mean, we've already generated so much trust, and people are listening. They're ready. And the Pathfinder projects have been successful. You know, the fact that we've been able to have the food vending portal and, you know, working with Johnson County Public Health, and that's ripple effect. I mean, you know, those mobile food vendors are talking to each other because they do talk to each other because they say, hey, don't go here, go here, right? I mean, we're all humans. So that's starting something. So yeah, I think taking action and making it North Liberty, you know, style is really what we hope to see. And of course, this is a plan and it's mostly a study because most people were saying, well, we want to do something, but we don't know what there is out there. And so now you know, at least in part, what is out there. We hope that you can take it further. And of course, we're here as a resource. We have some of those established relationships, but we also know how to convene people. So we'd be happy to help in any way we can.
Well, to put a finer point on that, then these Pathfinder projects that are here are certainly work that you're doing or work that you're committed to continuing to do. Is there a way for you to work with us as a city? And I don't know how many or who would be a part of that, but I think some real physical handoff of the work that you've done and the relationships that you've developed, conversations that you've had, and how we could directly incorporate them here in the city would be helpful to us, aside from these, or in addition to these Pathfinder projects. Is that something that you'd be able to make space for us to
absolutely.
pull off?
Absolutely, in January.
Okay.
Yeah,
Same
no,
here.
absolutely. Yeah.
Here.
No, thank you for asking that. And that is what we really hope, is that we can help, you know, pass this on. So all of the relationships and the work that we've been doing is uplifted, and then you can take the North Liberty pathway. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. We'll track you down in January.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Good
Thank
luck.
you.
Thanks, Pete.
Good luck.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. I'm gonna try and sleep tonight.
All right. That leaves us with old business. Anything that we didn't cover already tonight, you guys? Seeing none, new business. Yeah, Brian.
I had a couple things. First, anybody watching, remember to vote if you've not already done that. And then for anybody and the council, that next January they'll start the another session of the Citizen Police Academy, or they're calling it kind of Community Police Academy. And so I found that very useful and helps you really understand what's going on and why things are done sometimes the way they're done, which don't always make sense. And if anybody wanted to do that and had some time, it was very eye-opening, I thought. And then I'm not sure if you all got the invitation from the National Guard for the civic leader event in Iowa City. And I attended that, I think, 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And I found that was pretty cool. It was basically, the National Guard saying, hey, if you have people in the military, which we do, that, this is the expectations as an employer, but these are also things that we can help you do and stuff. And then they actually toured the Readiness Center, which is a pretty impressive facility. It looks like a big building on the outside, but when you get inside, there's really a lot of stuff in there. And there's a lot of people running around worrying about things that we hadn't even ever thought about worrying about, trying to figure out answers to things before it ever happened. So if you can get into that, that would be good too.
I'll be going there next week. Thanks for reminding us.
Mayor, I'll be going to the Better Together event Thursday night, so I'll see this again and be part of the see who walks away with awards that night. So it'll be fun.
I'll be there too.
Yes, the same here. Anything else? A motion to adjourn?
I moved.
Three or four of them. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thanks.